You'll never guess what we just saw. A ghost story.
And maybe the whole world will remember you, or maybe just a couple of people, but you do what you can to make sure you're still around after you're gone.
So we understand that this movie has been out in super limited release for a while, so maybe you've seen it, maybe you've not, but it finally came to a theater near us, and we've been hearing some really good things about it, but we are going to talk about A Ghost Story. Madison, who directed this movie?
This movie was directed by David Lowery and stars Casey Affleck and Rooney Mara. Austin, do you have anything else to say? Because I'm ready to get into the goods.
Let's get into the goods. So Madison, this was a very interesting movie experience for us. We went to one of those old-fashioned, super artsy theaters where they supposedly have plays every now and then, but then they let down the screen and you're watching a movie. The sound was great. I love the way that the theater looked, but the people inside the theater were very loud and obnoxious, and they didn't seem to like this. They didn't seem to like this movie as much as we did. I think if you go into A Ghost Story expecting a horror film, expect something like an Annabelle, you're not gonna get it. And I'm telling you right now, this movie is not a horror film, and I wouldn't even consider it. I mean, maybe it's a thriller, but I wouldn't consider it a thriller either. This is something completely different from anything you've ever seen before. And Madison, I really enjoyed this movie.
Yeah. I really, really enjoyed it. I was surprised, honestly. He was surprised that I
was
enjoyed
very.
it.
I went through the movie kind of looking at you like, okay, I don't want to be the only one in this theater, because we were the only two people in this theater
that knew what they were getting into.
That seemed to like this movie, and that's scary sometimes. I mean, of course, you go online and look at the critic scores and Rotten Tomato score. Yeah, they're great, but when you're in a theater surrounded by people that don't like it,
and
same thing.
They're verbally
moaning and like, and they walked out of the theater saying, I do not want to watch this movie ever again, and they were telling people, do not go watch this movie. That's kind of scary. It happened to me this year with It Comes at Night. I liked that movie, and everybody else seemed to hate it because they didn't know what they were in for. If you do not know what you're in for, do not go watch A Ghost Story, because this is a romantic movie. This is a think piece. This is a movie filled with questions, emotion, complete and utter emotion, and this leaves you wanting to know more things about life itself. It makes you question life, and that's so interesting coming from a movie about a guy who walks around in a bedsheet. It's not the story that got me. The story was very interesting. It's the way that the movie was filmed. There's these long takes, these long shots, and there's a couple that kind of fall on the negative side for me, but overall, I think by the time you get to the end of the movie, you see why there was these long takes. You see why these shots were 3 to 5 minutes long, and while you're watching them, you're like, why am I watching these scenes that has no cuts? Because I think that's the thing about movie watchers these days. We expect a Transformers, we expect an MCU film with a lot of cuts, a lot of action, a lot of craziness. These are long takes. These are shots that do not ever seem to end, but they have a purpose, and by the time you get to the end of the film, you understand why they held some of these shots. For there's literally a scene in the movie where Rooney Mara eats pie for 5 minutes, nonstop. He just sits there and watches her eat pie. I've never seen that before.
I know why it was there. It's literally there to make you uncomfortable.
It did.
And it does. And it just makes you like... It infuriated me. I hate watching people eat.
Yeah. And as I was watching it, I looked at it as a negative, but when the movie was over, I looked at it more on the side of, okay, I understand why they did it, because it made us feel the emotions of Rooney Mara after the death of Casey Affleck. And that's the best thing that David Lowery did with this movie, is it made me feel uncomfortable, and it made me feel emotional, and I think that's the two things he was going for, and I thought the execution was brilliant and different than anything I've ever seen.
Some other positives for me were, I'd say, the lighting. I didn't mention that to you before, but it's like, did you think they put like a layover?
It's kind of like an Instagram filter.
Okay, filter,
a little
that's
bit,
what I was trying to
but
say.
it was that old style grainy. Oh, and the entire film is, I don't know if it was a square.
We didn't notice until like the middle of the movie.
Yeah, well, see, I thought the film was going to start like that and then it was going to pull out to a widescreen, but its pull-out game is not strong. It never pulls out. I'm sorry.
The acting was awesome.
Yeah, the acting was, I mean, they didn't have to do much. Casey Affleck walks around in a sheet and Rooney Mara acts sad the whole time, but you get it. They did exactly what the script told them to do. And
well, yeah, there was barely any lines, so to be able to create the kind of emotion they did without lines.
I thought Dunkirk was little dialogue, but this is the least amount of dialogue I think I've ever seen in a movie.
And it still created just as much emotion, if not more.
A lot of tension, a lot of emotion, and we said this was not a horror film. There are some shots that are a little scary. There are some shots that remind you of what a horror film is like.
You're not scared, but I know what you're saying.
When it shows the dark closets for so long, and when the scene where, you know, he begins to do things that you didn't expect him to do. I'm not going to go into spoiler details, but there are some shots that are kind of like, oh, wow, I could see how this could scare the people involved in the movie. It just wasn't scaring us because we're more emotionally involved, and we understand where the ghost is coming from. Okay, so the negatives. I think the negatives in this movie are going to keep me from giving it the score that I want to give it, just because these things kept me from being 100% emotionally connected. This movie, the first 20 minutes, I was not as into it as I think I should have been, just because, and while the shots, I get it. These shots needed to be long because they tied together at the end of the movie, but I think these were a little bit too long. I think some of the shots kept going for maybe 30 seconds to a minute too long, especially the pie scene. I think the pie scene could have been trimmed down just a little bit, and I get it, I understand you want to feel the emotion, but that 5 minutes... It was probably maybe longer. 5 minutes of her eating pie? I think this is a movie that you cannot recommend to people. And I don't know if that should be considered a negative, but I can't tell you how many people that I know that will like this movie. Well, I think most people that I know would not like this movie.
Yeah, that's what I feel like you should say. You wouldn't recommend it to people who aren't super interested in films.
Yeah, this is a very film lover-centric movie. And I understand the difference between, while it's the Rotten Tomatoes score for the users is still in the positives, I get why only 67% of people would recommend this movie, because that's just the kind of movie it is.
It's not a casual watch.
I also don't know if I would consider this a super negative, but there's a scene in the middle of the movie where this guy goes on a big monologue, and while I do believe it tied the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie very well, it kind of felt out of place to me because the movie was so silent. There was no talking whatsoever, just a line here or there. But then you get on this 5 to 10 minute spiel, and all he does is sit there and talks. And I get it, but I feel like you don't need to force feed the audience. I was already on board with what the director was doing, but I see why the director did it, because maybe some people at that point are not on board, and that is a good way to explain why these things are happening.
I will say, I enjoyed the monologue. I know what you're saying, like he put it in there. It's more to like affirm your thoughts that you're already kind of you have about the movie already. I enjoyed it. I thought it was really, really good. I had like chills the whole time. A negative for me would probably be in the beginning. I could not understand what Casey Affleck was saying at all.
He had a Tom Hardy mumble to him a little bit, just a little bit. But you know,
it can't be a negative. But fine. That's how good the movie was. That's the only thing I can think of.
Wow! So I'm smelling a super high score. Wait! Gotta do the score thing. Okay, now we're going to score. Madison, I'm going to give this movie...
Okay, good. You're going first. Okay, good.
I'm going to give this movie an 88%. I believe in my heart it deserves a higher... In my heart, it deserves a higher score, but I can't get it there just because the lengthiness, I think, could have been trimmed down a little bit. Just trim the fat, man. Trim the fat, and you would have had a masterpiece here.
I think I'm going to give it a 90.
Oh, baby.
Well, I always try to think, did I like it more than this movie we saw? Did I like it more than this one? Mm-hmm. So far, I've liked it a lot more than the movies we've seen this year. Sometimes you're just in the mood for a funny, casual movie.
That's true.
But if you're in the mood for a good, hearty film, then I'd recommend this, and that's why I'm giving it a 90.
Yeah. So I know this video went on for a little while, guys, but I would like to recommend to you something. Before you watch a ghost story, go download the Stardust app. This is an app where you can react to and review movies. Right now, I'm doing my top 10 movies of 2016 series. I think you guys should get the app. You should follow me before you follow anybody else. And if you love reviewing movies, this is literally an app made for that, and I think it's absolutely awesome.
But even if you just want to get your feet wet a little bit, you don't want to do full-blown YouTube movies. A YouTube movie. A YouTube review, then these are only 30 seconds. You can kind of get the practice in. Comment below if you start one so he can follow you.
I'll definitely, if you guys follow me, I'll follow you back, and definitely comment below your thoughts on this movie as well if you have seen it. And if you have not seen it, would you go see it? Thank you guys for commenting, liking, and subscribing. She is Coleslaw6, I'm Matt the Burkinator, and we will catch you guys later.